This is Claire Rowley with the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. It's a pleasure to participate virtually in the Mojaloop community meetings in the upcoming days and to learn more about the great work that the Mojaloop communities are doing and how the LEI, the Legal Entity Identifier, can complement the work by providing a tool for transparent party identification. So I start the presentation today by answering the question of why is transparent party identification important in cross-border payments. Today, the lack of harmonization in cross-border data flows contributes to lack of transparency, especially transparency regarding the involved parties. Currently, the legal entity originator and beneficiary are described in text: name, address, sometimes local business number, and often a system-generated number. This approach makes it difficult to exchange and timely integrate data in global, digital, and cross-border environments. The lack of transparent party identification means higher costs, first for the payment facilitators who are responsible for the surveillance of nonconformity, and also for putting in place measures to reduce fraud. These higher costs are then passed to the originator and the beneficiary. The lack of transparency can also cause friction with the originator of the payment, who may have doubts that it is making the payment to the correct beneficiary. This could lead to delays in processing. All of this contributes to financial exclusion, meaning payment facilitators apply additional costs to non-transparent transactions, and there could be reduced speed for receiving payments. There could even be a decision by some payment system operators to avoid certain regions or jurisdictions that it is not possible to establish a basic transparency. So what are some of the solutions to this problem? Well, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, has already identified two: data sharing and data standardization, as together data sharing and data standardization enable the advanced analytics needed to support effective anti-money laundering and the combating of financing of terrorism. The LEI, the Legal Entity Identifier, is one of those standards. By adding the LEI as an attribute in the payment message, any originator or beneficiary legal entity can be precisely, instantaneously, and automatically identified across borders and legal jurisdictions. The LEI has also been included in the FATF Recommendation 16 consultation to ensure that the basic information of the legal entity originator and beneficiary of payments is immediately available for more timely analysis across all legs of the payment chain. If we look across Mojaloop and the global LEI system, we see common themes of interoperability and trust. Mojaloop is designed to enable interoperability across the different payment systems, allowing seamless transactions across platforms. This aligns with the global LEI system's goal of providing a standardized identifier that can be used globally for legal entities, facilitating smoother interactions between different jurisdictions and financial operators. Both Mojaloop and the global LEI system emphasize the importance of standardization to enhance operational efficiency. I give you a few more details on the global LEI system. The GLEIF, the Global LEI Foundation, the organization that I represent, is a not-for-profit foundation. We are providing open, digital, and reliable organizational identity services. We, the GLEIF, are overseen by a regulatory oversight committee composed of more than 70 regulators from around the world. This includes representation from Africa, including Angola, Mauritius, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. So how can the LEI be incorporated into payment processes? The LEI could be associated with merchants at the time of onboarding to merchant registries. Merchant registries can benefit from API interfaces to the organizational identity services of GLEIF. These enable rigorous data quality review, for example, check for duplicates, ensuring the consistency of location information, or checking for the use of code lists such as country codes or legal forms. By embedding the LEI in merchant registries, we achieve interoperability, meaning registries can communicate across payment loops and participants. This is a foundational requirement to enable further integration. I close with a bit of a look to the future. So the LEI is a precise 20-digit code linking to open and public data, allows for the first foundational step of the identification of the originator or beneficiary. But the next step is looking to secure the information exchange. And this could be done with the VLEI. The VLEI cryptographically binds the LEI to the organization. Credentials are something that can be shared or stored into organizational wallets, and organizational wallets can be made available on mobile phone applications. So what could a merchant do with an organizational identity credential? Well, it could use that organizational identity credential, the VLEI, to authenticate and to access to payment loops. It could use that organizational identity credential to sign an SMS, giving confidence to the recipient of the SMS that the message comes from the expected source. But all of this focusing on the security of information transmission and enhancing the trust that sometimes is lacking in today's systems. So I close here with a look on our work together. We at GLEIF are pleased to work with Mojaloop and to explore how to integrate the LEI and the VLEI into merchant registries to bring the benefits of transparency, more efficient operations, and ultimately lower costs and faster processing for the merchants participating in the loops. We look to advance our collaboration in 2025 and to deliver to the Mojaloop community an API-based plug-and-play solution for the integration of organizational identity services, thereby enhancing interoperability across loops, but also providing a self-owned identity for merchants that seek to be discovered by customers within their own jurisdiction, but also regionally and perhaps even globally. Thank you for your time and attention today, and I wish you all continued success in the Mojaloop community meetings this week. Thank you.
Good. There we go. Now, before we go on, Claire, I'd like to add Aranjay to our discussion. Aranjay Katakam, he's a long-established member of the Mojaloop community, a very active member of our cross-border special interest group. And perhaps, Aranjay, you'd like to spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself before we get into the questions.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Yeah, really nice to and happy to be here. Unfortunately, not in Kigali this time. So I spent the last 4 years working at the UNCDF, particularly on the G20 roadmap for enhancing cross-border payments. And more broadly, probably 15 years now in financial inclusion, 5 of which were at the GSMA Mobile Money. In 2020, I published this book, The Power of Micro Money Transfers, which anyone interested in cross-border payments should definitely read.
You're as bad as Boris Johnson flogging his book at every opportunity. Thank you, Aranjay. Claire, perhaps we could start by, you could clarify where LEI is in the African and South Asia context today and where we think it might go in the future.
Thank you, Paul. And again, a great pleasure to be here with everybody, if only virtually. But I give just some background, indeed, the LEI presence in Africa today. Paul mentioned in the opening, the LEI, there are 2.7 million existing around the world. The populations are generally starting from Europe to North America to Asia in the most populous regions, and then with Africa being the fourth most populous, followed by Southeast Asia, and then to South America. Today, there is only about 10,000 LEIs that are across the African continent. But we have a good and emerging network for expanding the LEI. We have, for example, LEI issuers that are domiciled in Nigeria, in Tunisia, Also, we are working with Afreximbank, the Mansa KYC registry, to integrate the LEI issuance. And I see this as a benefit for our work with Mojaloop. The LEI, it is a decentralized identity system. So myself sitting in Switzerland with the foundation, we are not conducting validation, verification, or even interaction with the legal entities around the world. Rather, we are providing these digital services of quality routines and then importantly of publication. So enabling discovery at a global level of businesses around the world. And we work with the local partners to issue the LEI. So this is why we are really excited to have the collaboration with Mojaloop, linking then to the local merchant registry to bring value to the validation, verification, KYC protocols there, and grow the LEI presence in Africa through the local business partner.
Yes, I mean, I'm probably relatively unique in this community in actually having registered my own business for an LEI. Just I wanted to see how it worked, and I have to say it was a very quick, efficient process. Didn't take very long at all. Within about 2 or 3 hours, I had a verified LEI, and it was on the registry. It did cost me $60 though. And that I think is probably an impediment to some of the smaller merchants that we're talking about. Is there a way that we can have some form of graded LEI where the verification of data is less good and can be perhaps cheaper? Is there any way of addressing that, do you think, Claire?
So we are also in a bit of a transformation area for our organization. The way the LEI system started, it was in response to the global financial crisis all the way back now, 2008, 2009. And it was originally introduced with the idea of bringing transparency specifically to financial marketplaces. So it started in derivative markets. And as a result, the business model was created more for these type of market participants. We have today 38 issuers around the world. Among them, you will find organizations that are often securities, central securities depositories, large financial markets information vendors, for example, Bloomberg, London Stock Exchange. But you could say the type of organizations that were closely linked to these type of financial marketplaces, derivatives, capital markets. But we see now the new frontier being payments. Paul, you mentioned already in your opening some of the work around FATF, looking into bringing more security, reducing fraud by confirmation of beneficiary. And this is where you see the need for more than text strings to describe beneficiaries and also the originators. And so we see with the bringing of the LEI into payments, specifically cross-border payments, there needs to be a new business model. Already we do have something called a validation agent concept where there is reduced pricing to organizations that onboard entities and then they create the LEI as a side product. We have, for example, now 22 organizations around the world, many of them being large banks. I give you the example, BNP Paribas is one of the validation agents, and they will actually provide to certain clients the LEI free as a byproduct of the onboarding due diligence. So this is where we look with Mojaloop, this collaboration to work with the merchant registries and also set up the business model that makes sense in Africa.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Andrzej, can you give us your perspective? I mean, you've got a lot of experience in this space. Where do you think the LEI fits into this patchwork? Or do you accept that there is a patchwork? Because that's my take on it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm really glad to see this partnership take place. I think I first proposed it in June 22, so good things take time, but here we are. And that was on the back of engaging with Claire and Stefan Wolf, who is the CEO at the time, when I really understood the power of the LEI and the VLEI, I should add, because it is phenomenal in what it can do. The challenge, of course, is scaling it, getting it to, getting the merchants, all of them. I primarily, as a first step, saw it to work with the hub operators and the DFSP participants, which is something that can be achieved even with the current business model, even with what we have in place, because we're looking at tens of LEIs, or maybe a few hundred at the most at that level, and even there, it's very powerful. And but then as we scale it, through the different tiers of merchants, I again, that would really help the network in all the ways you all have discussed. I fundamentally see the LEI as something that sits at the back. So an IP address, when compared to a domain name. So I often say using the internet
Right.
without domains would be a very clunky experience. All of us just typing IP addresses. And Google has 8.8.8.8, but that's not the case for everybody else. So that's the same thing from an LEI's perspective. If we, have something more human friendly in front of it, especially for merchant payments, then it could really serve two needs. One is, that easy user experience, and two is then all of the benefits that we get from actually having the LEI behind in the background in that transaction, identifying exactly who that merchant is.
So what you're proposing, Anjay, is some form of network of secured merchant name servers which share data, I presume, and which resolve it to an LEI.
Correct.
Is that really what you're
Yeah.
thinking about? Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody would altruistically host a merchant name server in, say, a country. So
I mean, it could be done by the hub operator. It doesn't have to be someone independent.
Yeah.
Or
Unfortunately, we do
Sorry.
have to imagine a world where there are switches other than Mojaloop,
Yeah.
unpalatable as it may be. So,
I mean, you know what? Maybe we can convince GLEIF to host it, right? Like, so.
maybe. Claire, what do you say?
Yeah. So I like RNJ as you described the LEI, a 20-digit alphanumeric code. It's not for humans. What is for humans is the reference data associated with it. So to pick up on some of the themes, the last panel about the transparency, the standardization, you could say, what is the most powerful aspect of the LEI, the 20-digit code? Well, it's the common data file format. So any entity that wants to be discovered around the world, let us say it is a beneficiary of a payment. So maybe an entity on an e-commerce platform. And so there would be a person looking on the e-commerce platform trying to understand, well, who's even selling this particular good or this service? And that's the common data file format. So that LEI 20-digit code, it could be displayed on the e-commerce platform, or it could just be embedded. But what it gives you is a common understanding, the name, the address, the legal form, the operating status that is common for the whole world. So whatever is the local structure, the local language that might not be accessible to everybody, well, the global LEI system renders discovery globally for any entity by overcoming differences in local data formats and differences in languages. So I would just say that the LEI 20-digit code, it is not for human consumption. The reference data that goes along with it is, and it is this concept of discovery that makes it interesting, maybe not for the smallest of the slow traders, but for even those smaller businesses that look to growth. Somebody yesterday was in one of the presentations was discussing about what is needed to grow. Well, needed to grow is access to credits, to financial products. And behind that is discovery of an entity in a trusted way. And that is a tool that the LEI system, the global LEI system can bring.
Yes, but as we've heard, well, I think the general perception in most large countries, I think, is that the only organizations that trade cross-border tend to be large organizations, large merchants, whereas that's absolutely not true in the rest of the world. And the use case we're particularly interested in, particularly in the COMESA project, and it applies much wider than that, is those small merchants some market traders who cross the border to trade in the next town over, which just happens to be in another country. It's a very common occurrence. So we need a solution there where that trader is not necessarily a formal business as well. So whatever we develop, whatever we have as our merchant name server, has to be able to cope not just with something that resolves to an LEI, but something which is applicable to that sole trader, unless we can find something which derives from LEIs but is more informal for those sole traders, because it still means that we are seeking something which is globally unique, either or worst case, there is a country code associated with it.
And I think, Paul, this is the fabulous opportunity we have for the collaboration. The global LEI system was set up to evolve over time. This is why we have our regulatory oversight committee. So we bring these type of problem statements also to the central banks, the securities regulators that are involved, for why the system should change. And we do look to learn a lot from the work that you do in the local communities with the upcoming pilot.
Yeah, we have agreed prior to this convening in the product council that we'll have a work stream which is entirely focused on this payments addressing problem. And I hope, and the first part of that will be to specify how we do it in a comprehensive manner. And I hope that you'll both be willing to take part in that, at least in the early stages, to frame that work stream, which will hopefully result in a pilot as originally envisaged. So, Arjay.
I wasn't expecting so many. It's just one. Yes. But that's actually appropriate because, Paul, how long I've been talking about this, and,
I know. Yes. Yeah. You have been. But as ever in this world, it only really becomes real when we have people who actually want it and want it urgently. And we are now at that stage. So there will be a new work stream. And I hope that people in the room will be willing to contribute to that work stream as well. So I think that about covers all of our questions, to be honest with you. Let me just, there is actually a more general one, which I probably should have brought up. We need some form of payments addressing which addresses not just merchant payments, but also other use cases, an obvious one being P2P. Are we content to just focus on using mobile phone numbers for that? Because it doesn't work in some markets. We know that some Mojaloop deployments already have struggled with the fact that there are multiple payment wallets on one mobile phone, for example. So how do we address payments in that context? Arjay, you've done a lot of work in that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're seeing in Brazil is a good example. So Pix uses 4 different types of identifiers, proxies, aliases. One of them is mobile, email, tax ID, and the third one is fourth one rather is a generic random code. The mobile number and the tax ID are most commonly used, about 90% is between those two, and then the email is the generic code is not very popular.
But that isn't that where the customer essentially defines their own alias?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So we do have the problem of one mobile number with multiple accounts. I think, so Michael and I presented on that in March, and since then we've made some more progress on trying to identify the uniqueness space. So I understand there's a session tomorrow. some time
Yes,
to.
Michael has a session focusing on that. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
So yeah, not to steal his thunder, and
Yeah.
we'll contribute to that session tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, that's an appropriate place to end this. I think we are over time. So thank you to Arunjay for joining, and thank you to Claire for your presentation. I'm very much looking forward to a fruitful partnership in this space. And thank you very much today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, and Arunjay. A quick round of applause for them.